Hi, everybody. My name is Virginia. I'm one of the librarians at Allen Hancock College, and I'm so glad you're watching this video about citations. Today, we'll be covering why and how to do them. So why do we cite? We want to cite in order to give credit to the authors of which we're borrowing information and incorporating into our assignments. If you're doing a presentation or writing a paper, you might have to go out and look for information outside of your classroom discussions, for example, or textbook. And anytime you access information from outside sources, you want to let your reader know that you're doing so. When you're proving something or commenting on something and you're referring to an outside source, you're demonstrating to your reader that you have conducted research in order to support these claims. The other thing is that you're avoiding plagiarism by actually citing. So many times we are using and borrowing information and we want to make it explicit to our readers and our audience that we are borrowing this information from an outside source. So by doing so, by acknowledging the fact that you are borrowing or taking information from somewhere by citing, you are avoiding plagiarism. And that's a really important thing as you go along in your academic journey, that you understand that it's one of the cornerstones of academic honesty, that you present the information that you've found as an outside source, even though you're incorporating it into your paper. There are different types of styles and formats. So if you're in an English class, for example, you might be using an MLA format. If you're in a psychology class, for example, you might be using APA. For history, you might be using Chicago. So all of these different types of formats or citation styles will be allowing your reader to know the discipline that you are working within. Your instructors are likely to tell you which citation format you are supposed to use for your assignments, but if there's ever a doubt, please make sure that you connect with them and clarify, and that way you know that you're following the right format. Not all sources are going to be cited the same, whether you're using APA or MLA or Chicago. So, for example, if you're using a newspaper article, the citation format is going to look a little bit different from a book. So we're going to look at a couple of examples later on. And then not all citations will have complete sources of information. So for example, you might find a web article that does not give you a publishing date, or it might not give you the author's name. In this case, you might want to refer to a librarian to see how you might approach this, but this is an overview of citations, and so it's something that you want to be aware of. And again, with all of those little formats, questions that you might have, a librarian is always happy to work with you. So just keep in mind that citations are going to follow a specific format depending on your discipline or your instructor's assignment. It'll also look differently for each type of source that you incorporate, whether a book or a journal article or a website article, for example, and that not all citations will be able to complete every requirement because the source itself doesn't have all of those components. And so we'll learn how to address those. There are two types of citations to keep in mind. One is the in-text citation, and then the full citation comes at the end of your paper. So in-text citations are found throughout your essay, for example. This is going to give your reader a very short clue that you have incorporated information from an outside source and used it in your paper. You're only going to use a couple of things depending on the format that you're using. For example, MLA might be the author's last name and page number if you have it, and APA might be the author's last name and the year of publication. Those are very short pieces of information that tell your reader that you took a source, an outside source, and incorporated it into your essay. Your full citations are going to be at the end of your paper, and that's where you're going to accomplish providing all of the information needed so that your reader can actually find the source that you accessed. So that's where you're going to find all of these little components, including the author's name, the title of the article, the year it was published. So depending on the citation type that you're using, it's going to look a little bit different. But for these purposes, just remember that the in-text citation is just a very brief bit of information to tell your reader, to signal to your reader that what you are talking about in your paper is actually from an outside source. And then at the end of your paper, you are going to provide the full citation with a lot more information that will allow your readers to actually go and find the source on their own. The in-text citation will most likely, and it should, match what is in your full citation. And again, we'll refer back to this later. But the reason I want to point this out right now is that as a reader, you want to be able to very quickly find the citation that you're referring to in your paper. So what you have in your in-text is going to match the first part of what you have in your full citation. So depending on the format, for example, MLA, it should be the author's last name, and then you should be able to find that very quickly in your works cited. The types of sources, again, that you'll be using will require different components. So depending on your format, you're going to have a specific order in which you present this information in your citation. For example, MLA will start out with the author as well as APA. And then as you go further down, the order might change a little bit. So again, we'll be looking at examples in just a bit. I want to say that citations take quite a bit of time, and they are kind of difficult to do if you've never done them. But there's no need to memorize anything, and just remember that there are people to help you as well as tools. So the tools that I want to highlight are those that are accessible through our databases, through OneSearch. There might be citation generators that you've heard of and you're curious about incorporating as part of your process. We also have citation guides and videos available. There's a really great resource called OWL Purdue, and that is one that we very often reference as librarians. And when we're working with students, we will refer students to those examples because they're really well explained and have a lot of detail. There's citation manuals, publications. So there's so much to learn about citations. Again, it's something that you want to avoid memorizing, and you just want to use these resources. Use it as part of your citation process to access these resources as you're putting your citations together. Even when you are using a citation generator or a database tool, you want to double check your citations for accuracy. So they are saving you a lot of time. You can copy and paste what you have, but then always double check. And I like to double check by going to the OWL Purdue guide, which I'll show you in a bit. So here's an example of an MLA citation. So the top part is showing our in-text citation. The example here includes the author's last name and the page number. The bottom section of this page is going to show you what the works cited is going to look like. So that is at the bottom of your paper in a separate page, you have a works cited section where all of your sources are listed in alphabetical order. So you'll notice that your in-text citation has the author's last name, and it matches the first entry part of your citation when you look at your works cited. MLA follows this format: author, comma, first name, and then the title is going to be in quotes, followed by the journal title where this was published, with any volume information, date, and page range. Sometimes you might have a link that goes along with it, or a DOI. So those are the two other components that you might incorporate. This is an example of an academic journal, which are sources that you fairly often are going to use in your papers. Another resource that you might come across is a website article that you might want to incorporate. And so you would use the author's last names and first names, the title, the website name, the date that this was published, along with the link, and then the date that you accessed this article. Note that things are perhaps italicized or using commas versus periods. So you want to be very detail oriented when you're going through your citations, which is why I highly recommend you get a second pair of eyes And perhaps that might be a librarian that you're working with so that we can give you any feedback. Or perhaps you just need a cup of coffee and good sleep and then try it on your own and come back to us for more help. APA follows a little bit different of a format. So instead of using the full name of the author, you have the last name and first initials, followed by the date in parentheses, so it's just the year in this case. The title is in lowercase, and then the journal where this was published is going to be italicized, along with the volume, which is also italicized, and the number, the issue number, as well as the page range. And then it's going to be followed by the link, the DOI. You'll notice that, again, the first part of your references in this case for APA, that your full citation that goes at the end of your paper is going to match that first part of your parenthetical citation. So you have the last name, and then the second part is going to be the year. So this is what would be in your paper. And you can choose to incorporate this citation, the in-text citation, at the end of your sentence when you're writing a paragraph in your paper, or you can incorporate it as part of your sentence. So that would look like, according to Alexander, 2018, parentheses, Allen Hancock is one of the best community colleges in California, period. Or you could say, Allen Hancock College is one of the best community colleges in California, ended by a parentheses that includes the last name and year. And then at the end of your paper, you'll see where it is exactly that Alexander mentioned this. So I would know that Alexander published a paper in 2018 that was titled Past as Prologue, and then all of the other information I need to kind of go through and see if I can find this myself. Some helpful tricks when you're going to compile your citations is that you keep track of your sources. The research process requires that you look at a lot of different sources before incorporating them into your paper. So you want to come up with some sort of system where you're not losing track of your sources, but also knowing where it is that your citation are going to fall within your paper. So if there's a paragraph and you decide that you're going to use a citation, you want to make sure that you keep track of both your in-text location as well as your article. You also want to allow yourself time to put your citations together. And I would recommend doing this along the way and then doing a final review towards the end of your paper once you've finished writing it. Because if you leave everything towards the end, you might realize that you forgot where a citation came from, or you might be pressed for time and forget this last piece that's really, really important. A way that you can maximize your time is, again, by using those citation tools. And then lastly, by visiting a librarian. We're going to be your partner in this process, so make sure you reach out. So whether it's your first time creating a citation, you forgot how to cite something, there's an example of something that you haven't cited before, or you just need a second pair of eyes, you want to check in with us. Right now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples that I like. So I mentioned tools that are really helpful. We're going to go to the Allen Hancock Library. So we have the one search bar here, and this is one of the places where I could look for information. So if I went to look for an article on education, college students, and debt, I'm going to get a whole listing of resources that is available through the library. And as I pull up these results and decide that I found something that I like, I can click on the article and then make use of the citation tool. So not only am I going to email myself the article that I found that I think I might be using, but I also want to make sure that I keep track of the citation for that article. So if I go to the citation tool, I can go ahead and select the citation format that I might need, and then incorporate this into my paper. So by the time that I've selected, copied, and paste it into my paper, 90% of my citation is done, but I still want to make sure that after I've compiled all of my citations, I give it a second glance just to make sure there aren't any errors. But just so you have an idea, this is an MLA citation format. You have the last name and first name of the first author, and then the second author's first name, last name. The title is in quotes, and then the title of the journal where this was published is in italics. It's followed by the volume information, the issue number, the year this was published, and the page range, along with the link. So that is my MLA citation. You'll notice that APA looks different. So again, when you are working in an assignment for a particular class, make sure that you know the citation format that you're supposed to use and select the right one when you're using a tool like this. In APA, you're only listing the last name and then just the first initial. It'll be followed by the year of the publication. The title in this case is actually supposed to be lowercase. So here is a mistake that we found, and we wouldn't have known that unless we reviewed the citation that we're copying and pasting into the paper. So that's why it's really important that even though this is a really great tool, that we double check our work. So it might save us 90% of the time that we would have used in order to create this on our own, but then we still want to double check it. So you'll see that there are different citation formats that you can choose from. Make sure that you select the one that applies to your class and then that you review it. So that's one of the citation tools you might come across. I'll also show you, if you go to the library's databases, that there is a similar tool there as well. So if I went to one of our regular, most used, popular databases, I'm going to find a similar tool. Oops, let's see. There we go. So now that we're logged in, I'm going to try to find something on college debt. So say as I'm reading, I find an article that's important to me or something that looks interesting, I'm going to click on it. If after browsing through, I realize that this is something that I would want to keep, I'm going to send it to myself. But then again, here's that citation tool, and we don't want to forget to cite our sources. Same as in the one search, you have options for different citation formats. So say you're working with MLA, you're going to copy this and paste it into your paper. Before submitting it, you're going to double check and make sure that that citation is indeed correct, that there aren't any missed errors. APA is going to look a little bit different. And again, we want to make sure that these are lowercase when you're working with APA. So even though we found a couple of things that we want to tweak, the majority of the work is done for us. So that's really helpful. All right, so those are the citation tools that are available to you through the library's website, which again are really helpful. We want to make use of not only the citation tool in this case, but also sending ourselves the email version of this article. I'm going to show you what OWL Purdue website does when we're looking and double checking our citations. So OWL Purdue citations, and you can just look it up. This is the website. And because there's so many different formats, you want to look at which ones you're looking at for. So APA, MLA, Chicago, those I would say are the most popular. MLA again is for like your English class, or APA for psychology, Chicago for history, and other classes might follow something else. So always double check to make sure that you know what kind of citation style you're supposed to use. So let's look at the MLA style guide. There is a lot of information here, but if you're looking for an example of a paper, if you are looking for examples of different types of articles or sources, you'll find all of that listed here. So just by Google searching OWL Purdue citations and then selecting the citation style that you are interested in, you can get a lot of information. For example, we'll look at the works cited page and see what comes up. So there are lots of different rules to follow: capitalization, punctuation, different authors' names, how you would do one author versus multiple authors, all of these different examples you might come across. The reason I'm pointing this out is because, again, we don't want to try to memorize something when there's a tool available to you and a resource available to you that can provide the information that will allow us to double check our work. And this is something that, again, librarians use really regularly. Even though we do this all the time, it's always helpful to have that backup and make sure that our work is correct. So I highly recommend OWL Purdue as your guide. Let's look at a works cited sample page. So MLA, for example, your English class has required that you use multiple sources. When you have your works cited page, which is the page at the bottom of your paper, you're going to list each and every source that you have compiled and used in your paper. Not just consulted, but actually used and incorporated into your paper. Throughout our research, we're probably going to consult a lot of different sources, but if we don't actually end up using it, then you can exclude that from your works cited. But if you do incorporate any sort of information from a different source, then please make sure to cite it. You're going to notice that all of these entries are in alphabetical order, so by last name. And you'll see that there are different types of sources, and they're going to look a little bit different. So for example, this is a New York Times article. We have the author, the title, where it was published, when it was published, the link, and then the access date. So this tells me that I accessed this article in May of 2019, but it was actually published in 2007. So all of these things give me clues as to the kind of information that I'm including into my paper. And again, with this full citation, I could go ahead and actually recreate your research process and find the sources that you are using. So it's really helpful to have that as a reader. And then in-text citations, as I mentioned, should be matching the first part of your paper, of your works cited. So that would be if this is your full citation for a book that you use, that's at the bottom of your paper, you would incorporate just the last name and then a page number if you have it. So in this case, the author could be mentioned as part of the sentence or at the end of your sentence in parentheses. This is a very basic citation sample, but sometimes you don't have a page number, and so all you'll include in this case would be the author's last name. Again, you might come across lots of different examples. What do I do if I don't have an author last name, but I really want to use that? No problem. There's a way to cite that. So again, as you go along your citation process, make sure that you're referring to these tools and resources, especially the OWL Purdue guide. That is going to come in really handy as you're double checking those automatically generated citations that you used in the databases. So if you hit the cite button in this case and you come across a situation where you're not really sure whether or not that citation is correct, then you'll use it in conjunction with the OWL Purdue guide and double check your work. And you can always check in with one of our librarians by going to the library page and accessing the chat function or coming in person during our open hours. If you have any questions, please make sure that you reach out. That concludes our workshop for today, and I'm really happy that you have joined us to learn a little bit more about citations and how and why we do it. Thank you so much and have a great day.